this is Erin with Cornell Studio Supply, located in the Gem City of Dayton, Ohio. We are a proud sponsor of this episode and the Brickyard Network. Join us June 21st to 23rd with a hands-on workshop with Simon Levin and participate in a rocket kiln wood firing with Lisa Orr. Visit cornellstudiosupply.com to sign up. We are happy to help you with all your pottery and ceramic sculpture needs with the best customer service and world-class workshops. At Cornell Studio Supply, we are owned and operated for potters by potters.
Welcome to the Tales of a Red Clay Rambler podcast, featuring interviews with culture makers from around the world. This is Ben Carter. I'm going to be your host. If you'd like more information on the show, please visit our website, talesofaredclayrambler.com. Welcome back to episode 510 of the podcast. Thank you all for tuning in. This is May, so that means that we are celebrating the 12th birthday of the podcast with a fun drive. We are listener supported, so I certainly appreciate your donations, and there's a couple different ways that you can give to the show. If you go to talesofaredclayrambler.com/donate, you'll find a link to our PayPal portal. You can also become a sustaining member on Patreon. To thank our new Patreon supporters, we have merch including t-shirts, hoodies, posters, and much more. If you do become a member on Patreon, you will have access to the exclusive Tales from the Vault podcast feed, which features episodes that are no longer available on major podcast apps. I would like to thank everybody that's been donating, and I certainly appreciate you all being a part of the Red Clay Rambler community. I definitely couldn't make this show without your help. Today on the show, we are talking with Judi Tavill. She has had a broad career in the arts, starting in fashion and now creating biomorphic ceramic sculpture. In our interview, we talk about her career in fashion, blending drawing with sculpture, and preparing for her upcoming solo show at the Ivy Brown Gallery. That show, Entanglements, will open May the 16th, that's next Thursday, and run through June the 26th. To see that work or for more information, visit juditavill.com. Without further ado, we'll get to the interview. So what was your original interest in fashion?
I was interested in fashion very young. When I was about 12, I had decided that's what I wanted to do when I grow up. Back then, there were all these magazines, and my mom had them all. Like, she wasn't, like, super fashionable or anything. I mean, she was fashionable enough, but but she had, like, Vogue and Harper's Bazaar and Town and Country and Elle. And, you know, the way they did fashion photography then, they actually took photos, like, straight on of figures. Some of them were not that way, but there were enough that were that way that I could like put a piece of paper over the figure and draw the figure proportionately and learn to draw the figure that way. And it worked for me to sort of create like croquis and stuff like that. Like I would just design my own clothes on the actual figure. And so basically, yeah, that's how I started like drawing things. And I mean, even before that though, I was like doing that with my Barbie dolls and like cutting up clothes for the Barbies and changing things and adding like little doodads to what they had. And I played Barbies for a really long time. When I think about it, it's a little frightening. I had a Tuesday Taylor doll, which you could switch her hair, who was not a Barbie. It was like a different brand. You could switch her hair from brunette to blonde, like the head turn. But I stepped on her head one day, so it like stuck out. But it didn't make me like not use her. Like I needed the people. So yeah. So like Yeah, I would say I had a fairly vivid imagination in terms of that. But yeah, I always really liked the fashion and everything. And and so basically, we didn't have like career counselors. We had guidance counselors and stuff like that. And I mean, I had done all sorts of research because I was growing up in Baltimore, which wasn't like the fashion capital of the world. Fashion, was okay. It was East Coast, but it wasn't like high end stuff or anything. But I ended up kind of finding my way, and like I just remember like I would get the listings of schools from the guidance count. Like I just was always ready for the next thing. Like I wanted to get out there and do stuff. And yeah, and it was surprising because I ended up going to Washington University in St. Louis, as opposed to RISD and Parsons and FIT, which I had applied to and surprisingly got into. But then when push came to shove, I really liked the idea of going to like a 4-year institution and the whole idea of a college life at the time. So I ended up going out to St. Louis from Baltimore and kind of like thrilled to just be gone. And so I did. And, but it was a very sort of tutorial experience. It wasn't like a big fashion design department like you have in the city. And I still ended up I was always very much like resourceful, doing things on my own because I don't know why, but in every situation of my life, it seems like I've had to kind of figure it out for myself. I haven't taken a lot of the direct routes that you can take. So even in St. Louis, like I had my own line of clothing during college at this little boutique there, and but I ended up taking a job after college working for Venture Stores, which was the last thing I expected, which was a Midwest retailer that was basically the budget floor of May Company had spun off to create like competition for like, I mean, it was the beginning of the Target and Walmart time period. So you had Caldor on the East Coast, you had Venture out in the Midwest, et cetera. And they offered me a job as like an assistant fashion director and product development designer. So that basically was designing for men's, boys, and kids and doing like fashion forecasting and stuff like that. But they had me going overseas almost immediately. Like 3 times a year, I was in Hong Kong, Taipei, Singapore with the buyers, meeting the suppliers and stuff like that. And it was really a great experience. But then I was like, I really want to be in fashion. Like this is great, but I need to get, and a friend of mine was like, she came out to work there because she had a boyfriend doing a graduate degree out there, but she was like, you need to get to New York. So I end up going to New York, and believe it or not, the big boss at Venture, who was like head of all soft lines, ends up becoming like a major mentor in my life in a lot of ways because she finds out that I'm interviewing in New York City and is like, why didn't you tell me? And we're talking a 90-person company, like at corporate in the office. And so I'm like, because I didn't want to lose my job. And then she finds out and she's like, I'll just send you there. She gets me like a $900 TWA. This is 1991 too. And she ends up sending me to New York. I had a couple of interviews set up and she hooked me up with a couple. Anyway, I end up working for Gaetano, leads to another job. I meet my husband, who's doing residency in Philly. I'm kind of stuck in New York now. Like it's definitely happening. And I end up going from one job to the next and what have you. And then I ended up getting an opportunity to design. I applied to a Women's Wear Daily ad, which is how you got a job back then, in fashion. And there, I was looking a lot for opportunities in Philadelphia, where my husband had, I had met him his first year of residency, so he had 5-6 years left, and I couldn't believe it, but I ended up looking for jobs in Philadelphia. And so this opportunity came up for this line called Lilly Pulitzer, which they were bringing the line back. I mean, this was a line of Palm Beach, golf, preppy, it's very quintessential Palm Beach, which now, if you watch Palm Royale, it's all the clothes on the first couple of episodes. It's like the story of my Lilly experience. And I knew all about that sort of culture as an outsider. So that was an interesting thing. Like, once again, I needed to be resourceful and figure out like how to make this work and find out who my customer was and do all this stuff. So I did all that, and so I applied for this job, and I got the job. And so, but the job was basically me, the 3 partners, and the youngest partner's house was the office, because he wasn't married at the time. And they were like a startup, and they had come from the fashion world. Well, not even fashion. They came from an apparel company, but they were bound and determined to make this thing happen. And so I worked for them, and the company grew, but I ended up having to design print design, which the style of the clothing is very print driven, because the story of Lilly Pulitzer is basically that, I'm going to cut the story really short, but the bottom line is that she was working with Key West hand printers at the time in Florida. And so all of these fabrics that these little shifts were made out of were designed mainly by this one artist through there, Susie Zuzek. And it was sort of studying what she did that led me to design this next wave of designs. And it just worked for me, because I was very line quality driven in the way I did art and the way I drew my fashion illustrations and stuff like that. So most of the print artwork I did was actually made with Prismacolor markers. Like, it wasn't painted the way a lot of people make prints. So I worked, so I've always been somebody that draws, which, is relevant to what I do now. But basically, it turned into a great opportunity. And I met Kate Spade while I was working there. And so when I wanted to go off and do my own thing, she was giving me advice. It was a really great experience. And I did my own thing briefly, but then I had my son arrived early and all this stuff. And so I ended up closing my own line, which was a really tough situation, because here I had always wanted to be a fashion designer. And when I look now at how old I was, it wasn't that long, but it felt like my whole life. And not continuing with it as my own line was a really big loss. And I didn't realize it as much until much later. But from there, I had a baby, and I kept freelancing, because I had started this line, and I spent a ton of money, and I borrowed from various relatives and stuff like that. And even my rep, I've never wanted to leave anyone in the dust. And so I paid everyone back, whether I sold the work or not. And I did that by freelancing, when my son was a week old. And he was 3 weeks early. So it was kind of a crazy time. And my husband was still in residency. So it was so basically we did all that. And then when we moved to New Jersey, I was like still doing freelance. I was doing print design for Dan River that did the Lily prints for bedding, and I had become a print designer basically. And then the bringing back Maxine Clark, who was my big boss at Venture, she was starting something. She had gone on. One of the reasons why I think she felt good about sending me off to New York was that she knew she was leaving Venture, because she went on to become president of Payless Shoes. And she started the children's Payless Shoes stores. And then she left there ultimately to start a company called Build-A-Bear Workshop, which is very... Yeah, she did. She was a powerhouse. I mean, she's this like 4, maybe 10-foot woman who is just the biggest powerhouse. And she, so she started Build-A-Bear Workshop, but she sends me this folder with the information in it of like this thing she's been working on. And I'm like, this is a cool concept. I didn't do anything smart like ask for shares, but she offered me the job of designing the first clothes for the bears, which anyone that...
We have never talked about this. I had no
We've never
idea.
talked about this?
No.
Yes. I did that here, and not in this house, but in New Jersey. Yeah. It was really cool. I mean, it was really cool, but it was also like, oh my God, I'm designing clothes for bears. What happened to couture, which, was my original goal. And so I did the bear design. I did like the rock star bear, which was basically an Elvis costume. And it was really fun. I mean, that year, and for many years, because I then had another son, my son was Elvis for Halloween because I just scaled up the bear design to fit him. Little kids basically are like built like teddy bears. So that was really fun. But so the first 10 outfits, and I have them like in my attic, were for the bears. And that was really fun. And then then 9/11 hit.
Okay, well let's back up before we get to that, because I have just questions about scale of design in the fashion world. So you go to school thinking, I would imagine most fashion students like, oh, I'm going to work in couture or something glamorous.
Yeah, I even went to Paris for a winter session and went to the Christian Lacroix Couture show, and I was learning that side of things, yes.
So it seems to me that goal of fashion students is very similar to people taking ceramic courses in a university thinking they're going to get a New York City solo show when they finish school. It's like you're shooting for the stars.
Sure.
But the reality is that most of fashion and most of ceramics, that the couture market is so small relative to actual people.
Absolutely.
It's fashion about fashion.
Music too, like same kind of thing, right?
Right.
Big pop stars, like how many are there?
Exactly. But then you end up working for companies that people recognize, like Lily Pulitzer. People probably will know that name.
They do.
The Build-A-Bear Workshop, people will definitely know that name because those things are everywhere.
Right. Now, yeah.
So how did you reset expectations when your career in fashion goes a different way? Because we're going to get to this in your ceramic career, but your ceramic career has been a lot of different ways. But I feel like you might have learned some emotional skill of reshifting or realigning when you have a new career opportunity.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes I think it might even be a bit of a handicap sometimes because I can shift. And sometimes I think maybe I shift too quickly. I mean, people don't see that because I'm pretty prolific when I do things. But yeah, I mean, I do think that there's, I think very early on, actually, I will take it back as far as applying to colleges for art. My art school, my high school, had great art teachers, but they really weren't geared towards what was happening in the college arena of like, you need this kind of portfolio and you need these 20 things in it, and that's the only way they're going to look at you. And I went to a portfolio review at Maryland Institute of Art, and I remember the School Art Institute of Chicago representative looked at my stuff and like was so mean. He was so mean. He says to me, let me tell you, if you submit this as your college application, you're not getting into any of these schools in this room. And he's like, if you want to, get into a fine art school, you need to have X, Y, and Z. See what this kid has. And he showed me all this stuff. I mean, I went home and I was just like, I'm not going to do art. I'm going to go into fashion merchandising. I'm going to apply to this school. Like I totally was in like a rethink mode. And I started wearing like ripped up jeans to school. Like I always had these two sides, like this very fashion-y side and then this like almost deadhead, looking look that I did. And my art teacher, this man, Mr. Nance, I had always thought of me as the fashion girl. And he came, I didn't have him that year, but he saw me walking around and he's like, what's going on with you? And I'm like, this is what happened and all this stuff. And he's like, no. Like, you've got to do what you want to do. So I sort of had like, my little moment where I was faced with like, do I just, pursue fashion merchandising? I had good grades. I had decent SAT scores. Like I could get into a decent college for that. But, or do I take this time, my senior year between now and application time, to just balls out, like, make art, make the things that they want you to make, learn whatever I could learn to do. And I was captain of the cheerleaders, which in our school didn't really mean that much, but I had all that going on. And then I would be like freezing on the side of the road, painting an oil landscape, like just faking it till I made it kind of thing. And I would say my art grew a lot in that very short period of time because I was just making and learning and working. And I applied to schools. I applied to all the schools I wanted to go to. I mean, yes, they were in fashion design, but many of them were part of a BFA program where you had a core, and they're different than they are now in most cases. So I got into WashU, I got Washington University in St. Louis. I always wanted to go to Rhode Island School of Design because it was next to Brown and I was like convinced that was great. I even had a fake ID I made back then that was like, I had the fake ID for the college, I had the fake ID for the driver's license, which I made from my Encyclopedia Britannica because yeah, and then you could buy like laminate and it worked for like a while. Anyway, and I did not look old. Anyway, but like it was so we could go dancing. But basically, like I was going to go to RISD. And so ultimately, and I got into Parsons, I got into FIT, and I felt like I showed that guy, like it was definitely a fire lit under my butt. And I really wanted to do it. And I saw that if I put my mind to it, somehow, like I could figure it out. But when push came to shove, I went to visit Washington University in St. Louis, and I ended up at that school. And that school was, like I said before, like it was not like all about fashion. I mean, it definitely had a great fine arts school. It had no ceramics when I was there, by the way, and that wasn't even on my radar. But yeah, I mean, it was great. I minored in business and whatever, and but ultimately. Yeah, like I've had things in my life along the way, and just talking to you now, I'm like realizing the chain of it. This must happen to you all the time. People are having like nervous breakdown. But basically, I see that, I've definitely I step up to the challenge for a reboot or, a reemergence or a shift in what you were doing and doing something else. And I guess it's also shown me that at any point in your life, like when you're feeling really down, you can realize that like this doesn't have to be your life. As long as you're still breathing, you can come up with something new. And maybe I've been fortunate enough to do it, but maybe part of it is actually, having the grit to stick with it and try things. And so I did all that. I did all the fashion stuff and everything. And, now I had 2 little kids, but I was like missing something. I had painted every room in the house we were living in. The house that we rented and then the house that we bought, like a different house. Like I had done everything. I was putting Martha Stewart to shame with the remake. I was like buying all her books, and then I was like, "What? I'm going to do it this way." I was doing all the things, and I was just coming up with whatever I like. And there was no internet like there is now, so it was like magazines and finding things to do that way. And and we had started to collect some art as well, and we knew an artist in the area, and we became good friends and everything. And he and I was like taking my kids to do paint your own pottery. I kid you not. And it was Jake, who's my older son. Sam was too little, but I took him to do paint your own pottery, and I was like, I can totally do this. So like I got a giant bowl like that you could purchase from them, and I did a design on it, and I gave it to my friend who owned this art gallery. And her husband, who's an artist, said to me, you should do this. Like, why aren't you doing this? And I was like, because it's paint your own pottery. Like, this is not my life. And so I ended up first I took a sculpture 101 course at Brookdale Community College. And that was really cool. But it was more of like, you would learn about like Janine Antony and her like intense, installations. And I did like this intense installation. But then I found out about Monmouth County Park Systems, which had at the time, and I'm pretty sure it's even more so now because pottery's become so popular, it had a great studio, and I started taking classes there. And basically, I took one class in hand building, and I was like, no. Like, I wanted to do, but at the time, they made you take the hand building class first. And I took the wheel throwing class, and it was so hard. And so, of course, I had to get better at it. Like, I was one of those people, like some people start to throw, and they're just like, oh, this is easy. Like, I could do this anytime, and they can walk away. Not me. Like, this was like, okay, this is really hard. It's like playing Nintendo and, making art at the same time. Like, I have to get good at this. And so I just worked really hard. And then I completely ignored the glaze thing in the beginning. So like here I had all these things at the end of that 6-week thing, and I did not know what to do. Like, I really had to come in and learn. So I started taking more classes, and I was up to like 3 classes a week. And then you were able to also buy like open studio time. And we were building a house, and like it went on and on. Oh, and in between I was oil painting, but that's a whole other story. But anyway, but while this was going on, I was doing these classes, and I just was totally hooked. And I ended up in a rental house we were in with half of our stuff packed away in the basement. I lined the floor with plastic, and I got a wheel, and I got commercial glazes, I think. I can't even remember. But at the time, while we were in that house for like 10 months. So I basically started like doing my own thing as much as I could without them getting too irritated with me at the craft center, because that's not their goal. They're not about firing your stuff. They're about like, come take a class, and which I totally understood. But I was like, I can't get a kiln right now because I have nowhere to put it. And also, how do I convince anybody who is my life partner that this is actually something I'm going to stick with? By the way, that kiln is still in my studio. It's 20 some odd years old. Anyway, that came later. But basically, Yeah, I was totally hooked. I was doing all the things. I was making bowls and filling them with candy for the holidays for everybody I knew, and like they all have them now, and I look at them and they're disgusting. But anyway, the bottom line is, yeah, I really stuck with it, and I, and then we finished building, and the builder for our house sort of figured out what was going on with me and took the space over our 2-car garage and made it my studio. So when the house was being built, people were like, "Is this your master bedroom?" Like, and people would walk through your house because they just could, and I was like, "No, it's my studio." And they're like, "Oh, what do you do?" And that was kind of hard to explain because I was only just, I don't know, but it became my studio, and the rest is sort of history. Like by August, so we moved into our house in like June. By August, I had my kiln, and I was ready and raring to go. And that slowly brings us up to Etsy time period, and Etsy was just really starting. And I did the whole like functional pieces on Etsy. I didn't want to put my stuff out there until I'd been at it for a while. So I would sell like locally. And then when I discovered Etsy, I'd been making work for a couple of years. And, but when I look back at what I sold and people actually paid for, it kind of blows my mind. like, who did I think I was?
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by the Rosenfield Collection of Functional Ceramic Art. The collection exists as an online resource for research and inspiration, featuring photos of over 4,000 objects made by over 1,000 artists. The images are high quality and can be used with no permission required, making them a great resource for students and teachers. To find out more, visit rosenfieldcollection.com.
The Bray Clay business is your best source for Bray epoxy, a 2-part moldable epoxy intended for post-firing repairs. Working like clay, it's easy to shape, texture, fill gaps, and recreate missing parts. Bray epoxy is sold in tan, white, and black base colors, and we also have a 9-color kit that will allow you to perfectly disguise your repair. Order online anytime at archiebrayclay.com.
I'm going to ask you a question that I think is very typical of your personality. So from the days of taking classes to when you were at your first ACC show, how many years were that? Because the thing is, like, you do a normal level of activity and then you keep putting your foot on the gas.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you go from essentially like craft school or art center learning to, no, this is a professional career. I'm going to do wholesale shows. I'm going to sell in galleries. Like, you have a fifth gear that you do in everything you do that I just know from being your friend.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I'm interested in how that fifth gear like has served you.
Yeah, I feel like I guess what you're saying is like I do the thing, and then I like get a little better at the thing, and then I'm like, I'm doing the thing.
Exactly.
Because, I mean, I've had some life losses and experiences along the way that have made me feel like this is it. Like you as Judi Tavill in this lifetime get one lifetime, whether we have souls and spirits and all of that, like that's a whole other podcast. But in this lifetime, this is it. And so many decisions I've made have come down to that. The friend who introduced me to my husband, who was also the friend who brought me, told me I had to leave St. Louis and go into fashion, who I met my very first week of freshman year. She ended up basically introducing me to my husband, even though we didn't, it's such a long story, but the bottom line is she passed away at 25, 9 months after introducing me to my husband. I think when I was 23, for one thing, and other things, I had this realization that like this is it. Like you've got, it hasn't always been a good thing. It's made me an impatient person with myself. Pottery, working on the wheel, I would even say, changed that for me. It made me have to suck it up and try again, suck it up, try again, and that was even like the choices I've made. I don't even know why I've made these specific choices. It's amazing what your life journey can be. Anyway, but the bottom line is that, I think, and there were other things before that, but I think that I just hit a stage, like my most recent thing, which we're not talking about yet. But every time along the way, like when I discovered a kiln and clay, I remember thinking, or even just the kiln, I was like, I will never get rid of this kiln. And it was like, why would you ever not work with a kiln? It can do so much. You can make whatever you want. You can make the tiniest things like jewelry, or you can make giant sculpture, but like you can even work with glass. Like it doesn't have to be clay, but there's so much to play with here. And I've never been somebody that is good with sitting around and saying, "Oh, I'm bored." Like I can't. And I've done meditation, and I always try to come back to that, but that is probably, it's probably the best thing you can do, and it's so hard for me to do, but it is definitely like that would solve all the world's problems, but truly, but I think that I see opportunity in a lot of different arenas, and I think the reason why I become so like obsessive in one area is because if I don't become obsessive in one area, there is so much to choose from. And it's that framework in my life, in my art, that gives me it's boxing myself in some time, that gives me the sanity to go as crazy as I want within that box. Like, as long as I'm in the box.
So in this sense, commitment is good. Like, commitment is the path.
Well, this is where I'm in a weird place now because, with clay, there were a lot of rules. And in some ways, that was very good for me. Like, this is how you do it. This is how you master the craft. This is what's allowed. This is what's not allowed. That's very traditional thinking. And certainly in the, Japanese and Korean and Chinese mindsets of clay, Vulcus is a whole other story. And now, I have more of an appreciation for that way of thinking now than ever. However, there is something to be said for the sanity that you get by creating frameworks in your life that keep things, manageable for you. And but as far as that fifth gear, I tend to hit a level, and like if I'm going to do the thing, I want to do my best at the thing. And even within like a series, Takashi Yasuda taught a workshop I took at Peters Valley years ago. And I was working on, they were functional pieces that my work had evolved to, that they were like cut into and they were shifted a little bit. And I was doing pretty well with it, but I was starting to get that little antsiness to do something different, which happens to me. And he said, you want to take it as far as you can take it. Like his belief was, he's like, it's like a marriage, he said, the divorced man said. However, he did say to me, he's like, you want to make sure you've like given it your all within what you're doing, so, and it's true. Like, you don't want to feel like you left it too soon. Like that could have been, and I do have scenarios where I feel like maybe I could have taken that farther, or, and so, yeah, I mean, I know this is all very sort of esoteric in a lot of ways, but it's also very tangible to me because it's, these are like life lessons, but they have manifested through what I've worked on in my art life.
You've had three distinct, at least in the clay life that you've had that I've known, you have three distinct periods. You have functional pots that were sold locally and nationally and through Etsy. Then you had sculptural vessels, which is when you and I really started talking through social media, which were really good. I mean, a lot of people, I think, could have made a career off of that.
Right.
But then now you have evolved probably in the last 5 years, somewhere in there, to large scale.
Because I'm 55. I'm almost 56. A number's just a number, but there's definitely been points in my life or life instances that have happened that have created a shift.
So turning 50 was, okay, I'm just going to go for it. I'm going to make sculpture.
Because if not now, when? I mean, you could say that when you're 20. And in some ways I have along the way. But I sort of was really looking at, creatively or even lifestyle-wise, what is it you really want to do that you haven't gone for, or even just that work that I was making. I had created a technique that was working for me. I was even teaching workshops. I could have gotten better and better at it. I could have gone bigger. I could have tried to refine it. I mean, it was a lot of texturing. That people ask me about my Instagram following, because now I'm at over 28K. And I say, first of all, I mean, I'm distracted by going back to this, but it was during that time when I was making time-lapse videos, pre-reel, where there were certain accounts that would, and businesses like Dipley and Board Panda or something that would pick up your stuff and either remix it with other people's stuff and say the top 30 ceramic techniques or whatever. But they would go viral, and then you would get a big following from that. So really, since then, I've just been trying to slowly not lose and grow my my following, just so that it's not tanked. But basically, I feel like I was doing the thing, I was growing doing it, essentially, but I'm looking at the stuff and I was like, it's not me. It's not saying anything. Once again, I'm designing a thing. It's more design than art. It's more creating a framework and only working within that framework. Now, this does come back to haunt me, but basically, I just felt like it wasn't expressing anything other than making and not that there's anything wrong with it. It was just my own personal interest in making something that was speaking to something larger. And even if the person looking at it, I mean, there was some of that in there. There was a lot about flow and connection, very design driven, the lines flow and connect. But that was all that's always been part of my aesthetic, I think. When I look back to drawings, to fashion illustrations, to the prints, to the work I did in clay before that, even I started to do the functional things. I started to cut into them and shift them, but it was always about continual line. It was always there, but in this case it became very corally looking, and everybody, and I liked that. I was definitely drawn to nature in that way, but I found that I was designing back into what I had sort of created, and I was designing, and did I just always want to do that? And, I just felt like it was time if there was going to be a time to do something. And it's like, and there was always like an image in my head that goes back to like college. I still am not living this image, but there's a part of me where I'm this abstract painter, and I've never, like, I'm not really doing that. Like, but at the same time, there's this energy that I wanted to put more into the work. And oh, by the way, like, the clay world was a great world, but it did have all these rules and regulations, and, you know, that were either spoken or not spoken. And I just felt like you're keeping yourself in that box. And why is that? Like, why can't you take the skills that you've learned here and apply them above and beyond this? Not even above, but in relation to, like, it doesn't, I have, you know, I have a huge ceramics collection. Like, I still am buying ceramic work from people and supporting other artists because I'm drawn to that. But a lot of that stuff is stuff I would not make. Like, it's not, you know, but as far as expressing myself, I really wanted to have more expression in my work. And maybe it's an ego thing. I you know, sometimes I think being an artist is so egotistical. Like, we're just constantly like, we're going to make the greatest thing. And isn't this great? And like, even like, I see it more in men, by the way, that like will put stuff out there and be like, this is awesome. Don't you love it? And like women, I have to say this, like, and it's a gross generalization, but I would say on the whole, we do a lot more of like, oh, it could be so much better, but like, yeah, I made that, you know, like, but at the same time, it is very what's the word I'm looking for? Like indulgent, you know, it's a very indulgent behavior. Art can be very indulgent. It can also be indulgent to the point of making, you know, you miserable, like, because you're indulging, and then you're like, oh, I hate it, and then you love it again, and it just goes back and forth. But the bottom line is, there's something to what I'm working on, or I felt like I was moving towards, which was more about not just being about that, but saying something to the world and our connection, and also seeing that. And having worked with clay and seeing you can build and build and build, but things can break. You can connect, but things can break. And can you repair? You can repair at certain stages, but not at others. Or can you, you know, and why can't you repair right up until the very end, kind of thing. And just all those kinds of ideas that sort of bleed into life. And I just wanted to not have the handcuffs of the ceramic rules on my limbs telling me, you know, you can't do this, you can't do that. So that led me into the phase I'm in now.
So at this stage, I just want to track this. No, you started this body of work at 50, and in 5 years, you're going to have in 6 years, you're going to have your first solo show at a New York City gallery, which is simplifying it. But the point I'm making is that your ability to obsess in one area has served you well. But I also think that the content of the work is about obsession now. You know, so content-wise, you're making things that look almost like an organism, where it is a self-contained organism that is moving through space. But it is also something that is visually very complex. Like, the surfaces have hand-drawn graphite lines over top of an already very complex sculpture. So can you explain that sort of content loop of human connection equals organism equals complexity?
Sure. I did a post back through UMass Dartmouth in 2000. 20 to 21 virtually because of COVID, especially because of COVID, with mainly with Rebecca Hutchinson and also working with Anthony Fisher, who was a drawing independent study. And basically, Rebecca saw the drawings I had in the background, and I was making the forms, but I couldn't enliven the surface the way I wanted to speak to what you're describing, basically. And she saw my drawings and she was like, I tried everything on the surface, glazes, but I also had tried oil paint, everything else. And she saw them on a Zoom, basically, in the background and said, well, why don't you just put your drawings on the work? And I was like, huh? So I did play with some Ongo sticks, but basically, I just went back to graphite and I ended up painting the surface really just to make it blank. And then I drew with the graphite and then I spray painted it on. I spray varnished it to seal it. So it's not a fired ceramic surface, and that's sort of breaking the rule. But as far as where this is all coming from and what this is all about, like that was it. It was about enlivening the surface. I see connections and this entanglement thing in every aspect of our lives, from the scientific to the physical to the, whether it's mycelium to the tree roots and growth and body, bone structure, as well as, neural pathways. But then I also see it in our society and our governments and our communities. And especially, as 2020 hit, well, first we had the 2016 election, which kind of led me up to making a point, or some kind of something. And then in 2020, and with the COVID and everything else, I just felt like I want to speak to this. And how do I speak to this? So it's abstract. I'm not painting pictures of riots. I'm not painting, I'm not building images of trees. It's this extraction versus abstraction. I use the term abstraction to describe my work, but really I'm extracting that energy and that structure that I see in all these different things. And it's that I'm trying to give you the opportunity to intimately experience, like when you get really close to a thing, one of my things, you see the detail and you can feel it. Like I want it to feel almost visceral. And I never feel like I'm quite there yet. And that is a reason to keep making too. But the bottom line is, like, it's about feeling that continuation and that breaking, that connection and entanglement, and see, and even personally, in the society and in what's happening in the world and in these cultures fighting and arguing, and this group is oppressed by people that were oppressed who were oppressed, and that was oppressed, and it's a mess. But you see that everybody just is part of this, and we're all part of this. And all we can do is try to follow that tangle, and potentially, there's maybe potential to untangle it and have some clarity. And that's really what I'm trying to talk about in my work. And, and now I'm moving the drawings onto paper as well. I've started to pull the drawings off, and that's okay too. Like, it's okay to, speak to this in different mediums. And who knows, I might have some performance art happening in the future. I'm open to that, because I really feel like we need to talk about these things, and maybe looking at them and thinking about them abstractly sets off something in your brain to realize what we're all part of and how it's just so much bigger than us and inclusive of us. And I know that sounds like a little Pollyanna-ish, I don't know, but I can't help it. Like that, honestly, that's where it's all coming from.
Can you plug the show, like where it's going to be and when?
Here's my plug. Okay. So yes, I have a solo show opening at the Ivy Brown Gallery, which is in the Meatpacking District in New York City. It's opening on May 16th. This is 2024. The opening is from 5 to 8. There will also be a virtual walkthrough that we're just planning now, probably June 4th. I think I'm focusing on like 7 o'clock in the evening, probably a Zoom, maybe a Facebook Live, maybe an Instagram, I don't know. And then we're going to do a closing, I think on the 26th of June, with an artist talk. So the closing will be from 6 to 8. This is June 26th. The closing will be from 6 to 8, and the artist talk will be about 7. And if you want to see the show at some other point, because you can't come to any of that, it's by appointment through the Ivy Brown Gallery. Ivy Brown is online. And if you want to subscribe to my mailing list, you can get all of this information, which is JudiTavill.com, JudiTavill.com. I'm also on Instagram at Judi Tavill Art. And I post a lot, so you'll know what's going on because I don't shut up. But anyway, yeah. That's the gist of it. And it's, Ben, I've known Ben a while now. And I mean, I can honestly say I'm someone that knows Ben in real life. Like we know each other from seeing each other in real life, which is a little rare these days. And your journey has been so great to watch as well. And I'm just lucky to be along for the ride.
Oh, well, thanks. I feel the same way about you.
Okay. That's the end of that. Let's get back to business. Anyway, okay, thank you.
Yes,
thank you for everything.
I'd like to thank Judi for coming on the show and for her friendship. She helped us when we first moved to New Jersey. She actually went down and saw a house that we rented because I was in Montana, Melissa was in Minnesota. We were both doing one-year appointments at different places, so we couldn't fly to New Jersey and find a place. So when I told Judi that we were moving to this area, she volunteered to go check out places for us, and she found us this great little house that was on a horse farm. And we lived there for a year, and I would not have felt comfortable moving somewhere without having Judi. She actually went to the house, got on FaceTime, and showed me everything, and most importantly, showed me the basement, which turned out to be a great studio. So thanks, Judi, for doing that and for being friends all these years. I did want to take a moment and thank today's sponsors. That's the Rosenfield Collection of Functional Ceramic Art, Cornell Studio Supply, and Bray Clay. If you'd like to become a sponsor on one of our shows, you can get in touch at brickyardnetwork.org. I'll be back next week with another episode. Thank you all for tuning in. If you'd like more information on the artists on the show, or if you'd like more information about the workshops and events that I'll be having in the next couple months, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook under Carter Pottery. Another great way to support the show is to leave me a comment on iTunes. To do that, search Tales of a Red Clay Rambler under iTunes Podcasts, and you'll find a page that's linked to our show. Thank you guys for the support.
This podcast is a production of the Brickyard Network, an extension of the Archie Bray Foundation for the Ceramic Arts. To find out more about our lineup of ceramic podcasts, visit brickyardnetwork.org.